get this thing going. Try not to drink any sparkly, bubbly water.
Got to get the fizzy water in.
Yep. Warm, fizzy water. Delightful.
Yes. So you're really a European.
Yes, I think so. in more ways than one, Yeah, that's crazy. But yeah, it's funny. Every time I see those, I can't say the name of, I can't say San Pellegrino in such a, it sounds so
Who
square.
is not sponsoring us, by the way.
No, but hey, we're open. So people at San Pellegrino, please reach out. We'd love that. This would be great. I think their red star symbol would look great on all of our stuff.
Just keep it out of shop for the moment until that money comes in.
That's it. I think today's gonna be fun. I think, one, we've had a little respite from AI for a little while, so now we don't need to feel bad about jumping.
Go straight back in again.
Jumping back, because of course there's lots to talk about. Yeah. But first, I was just thinking about this because I just came from like a kids event and stuff, and I was looking around. And let me ask you a question, because your phone right now, not in a case, but it's in a case. I'm like, I think I might be the only one that I know who doesn't put their phone in a case.
So I've got to ask you, have you shattered a phone by dropping it not in the case? See,
no.
I have.
Okay.
Which means, we got to go back here. So I do not like cases on phones. Okay. I like you, aesthetically, I think it's messy. A phone is designed to be a phone without a case.
It's gorgeous without the case.
But I have had too many instances where I've dropped it. And so we got to the point where my wife said, you get a case or else. We cannot afford this anymore.
And I know, for many people, they won't even open the phone up until the case comes, because it's like, it goes right from the box, right into the case. And it's just funny because I haven't had every iPhone. I usually go in 2-year cycles. Right. But I've had an iPhone ever since the original. Not a single one of them have ever been in a case. Mm-hmm. I have dropped them from the random occasion. Yeah. I've even had it slide out of my pocket when I'm getting out of a car and have it hit the pavement. Mm-hmm. Some of my phones have some dings and dents and things like that.
But no shattered glass on the front?
No. So maybe I'm either just lucky, or then also I'm like, well, how do people drop them all? I don't know. But I've never put a phone in a case, and it's like, I try not to judge others who do.
But you do.
But I understand it.
This is the judgy zone. Every week I come in with my phone in a case, and there's Sean looking at me.
Kind of side eye until I'm like, finally it comes off. I'm like, there you go. But it struck me as I was thinking about all the people in like my close, like family, friends, colleagues, and I'm like, I can't think of one person that I know personally that doesn't have like me, who doesn't use a case. Yeah. And I just find it fun. I was even listening to a podcast earlier, and they're talking about, when I'm done with my phone, it comes out of the case and it's pristine, like it's just came out of the box. And I'm like, well, okay, but then you've had it in this gigantic rubber cage
It's like people that wrap their sofas in cellophane. And they're so proud that they don't have any stains. The fact is, it's not functional.
It's mint. Really, I'm not sitting on that thing. Because I think someone gave me their phone one time to like hold. And I was like, oh, let me just put it in my pocket. And they're like the friction of putting a rubberized or whatever like into my pocket. I was like, how do you do this?
So we ought to sort of ask people to write in whether you're a case person or an anti-case person.
Well, and then also even with, so my wife, she's a case, she's a case person, and granted, right, her normal daily routine with a phone is a lot different than mine. Mm-hmm. Hers goes like into a purse, it goes into a thing, it goes in the bag. People carry them around in their back pockets, which I still don't understand. Not for me. But yeah, and then I'm like, there will be a time when she'll change your case out and be like, oh yeah, I forgot what color the phone was because it's been inside, I don't know. It just cracked me up because I was just sitting there. I'm like,
21st century habits and design.
Yeah. Or maybe I'm just the idiot waiting.
So this is a plea for anybody else that doesn't use a case.
I'm curious. Let me hear your voice.
Email Sean just so he feels a little less isolated.
That's right. Get in touch and, let's hear it. Like am I alone? Like, am I like the only, because it is, it's that problem. I'm like, this is a beautifully designed, and same with like computers. Yes. I don't put computers in cases. Yep. When we do these educational events, when you have these massive like carts of like iPads, again, I completely understand the necessity for the case.
Right.
Because otherwise the lifespan would be like it'd be like 5 days or something. But then you're just like, you take this beautiful, sleek piece of technology.
Make it chunky and heavy.
It's chunky and just like a major chunk. And it's just like, I'm like, it's heavy. It has like a lip, which always attracts like grime and dirt and stuff gets stuck in there. I'm like, that's gross. So
we should probably get off this because otherwise we'll get onto other tech like Kindles, for instance, in cases.
But. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Anyway, what were we supposed to be talking about today?
Oh my God, so much. Yeah. Let me ask you one more thing. So, because I do think not today, but I do think at some point we should. We really need to do a whole episode devoted to like new spatial cameras and stuff, because we, the nice thing now is we've aired our camera episode, so the cat's out of the bag. People understand now. Looking for an opportunity to talk about it, but I think I may have mentioned this before, but just super excited because Blackmagic, who is they've been a very affordable high-end camera platform for quite a long time. And they're the ones who've created like DaVinci Resolve and things. So if you're in the film or media industry, Blackmagic. But I'm really excited because we're getting real close to when their new immersive camera is supposed to come out, which is this fancy Ursa Scene Immersive. And this is like $30,000 camera.
Yes.
And it's goofy looking when you see it. I mean, it looks like it has goggles on the front of it. Right. But it's doing something that's been so difficult for so long, is basically trying to get like a true stereograph style film recording, but at high resolution and high frame rate.
Yep.
So for things like, any sort of headset, so like Apple Vision Pros or Oculus or any other sort of headset, to have a truly like realistic feeling immersive experience that's caught on just film.
Right.
And it was just one of those things where I'm like, before this, it took massive engineering feats to like create these like Frankenstein monster-ish cameras. Right. But now this is, again, not for the average consumer at 30,000, at least now, a couple of years, we'll see that go down. But I'm really excited because that'll mean people will start being able to create content. And then I started thinking, we need to get one of these. We need one of these here.
So watch this space. And I think we have talked about this before, but the idea is if we can get somebody to fund us for the experimentation, because this, I think, is really interesting in terms of how we engage through media.
Yeah.
Even the idea of having a podcast where you can immerse yourself in it. You can be our guest at the table and feel as if you are here with us in the room.
That's right. You could reach out and shake our hand or give us one upside the
right. Yeah. Well, maybe not, but yes.
Depending. But, and I think, maybe this will be just foreshadowed, like, I will be doing some experimentation in this space too, because also within that space.
So listeners should know, Sean has just got hold of an Apple Vision Pro, and he's like a kid in a candy store.
True. It's a little ridiculous, but also, even the advantage of spatial audio while watching or even just listening. If you're just listening, for example, like in a car or something like that, it can be a little off-putting. But if you have an immersive view, then that spatial audio sounds amazing.
That's it.
You, the listener, could be sitting, virtually sitting at a seat around our table here, and the sound would be natural to.
Sure, you should be able to turn to either of us and actually feel as if you're physically turning to us. That's right. Where the sound's coming from.
So lots of cool things, and I think we'll save it for. We'll do a deep dive. I think maybe. Around that stuff, because I think it's incredibly cool. And also, again, the reason I'm most excited about that new camera is because it will take the creation of these types of experiences away from only being these very niche, super, expertise led, to the point where people who can operate a somewhat sophisticated camera should be able to start making content. And that's exciting because, chase that down over a few years, the cost hopefully will get cheaper and cheaper. Before you know it, these things are,
So I'm going to foreshadow where we're going to go in the conversation, then we should probably finish the cold open. But the deal is, you either have 2-month subscription to OpenAI's latest offering at $20,000 a month, or you get your spatial reality camera. Which one are you going to go for?
Well, right now, I'm saying I have a PhD. I'm going for the camera. Right. I don't need a $20,000.
We're going to get to that shortly.
That's a great place. We'll just take a quick break and we'll come right back.
Initializing waveform. modulating signals for transmission.
Exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. Okay. And thanks to the magic of the movie magic, and we're back.
Yes.
Just like that. So, so for those of you who are brand new to our show, welcome. I'm Sean Leahy, joined by my amazing colleague,
Andrew Maynard.
That means this is Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like, what will it mean to be human in the future? And also exploring lots of fun stuff along the way, as we do. So I think, as I sort of mentioned, we had a little break from AI for a little bit, which was nice.
Yes.
Even though we can't really truly escape it, I don't think in some ways. But also OpenAI's they've been busy.
Yep, they have indeed. So people that have been tuning in will realize a few weeks ago, we started experimenting with the uber expensive $200 a month service from OpenAI, which seemed crazy at the time, but now we're both addicted. Yeah. And now, what is it? OpenAI have just announced a premium feature where you have PhD capable AI at $20,000 a month.
So it's crazy. So rumored, I guess technically. Yes. So the information broke the story that it's rumored, and I think it came from like inside information going to investors, saying that they're basically, it's 3 tiers. So what they're considering a knowledge worker. Again, I'm use classic air quotes for someone's watching. I don't know. Yeah. But a knowledge worker at around $2,000 a month.
Right.
A software developer agent around $10,000 a month. And then the big one, which is a PhD level thought employee or whatever for $20,000 per month.
Which actually, so I'm going to have PhD students listening to this thinking,
Ka-ching.
I'm worth $120,000 a year.
Ka-ching.
Yes. Well, actually, no, sorry, $240,000. I can't even do my math. $240K.
Yeah, and I had that exact thought because I was listening to this. I'm like, did they just market? Is now all of a sudden the market value for all PhDs to like basically over $200K a year? I'm like, suddenly, if there was ever a question of like dwindling enrollments in PhD programs, I think this just may have solved it if that turns out to be true.
So you're going to see these adverts on LinkedIn now with somebody holding a placard up saying, as good as an AI.
$20K. $20K a month, y'all. It's wild. And then instantly, it's funny. And it's funny how this kind of works, right? Like even just the psychology of the marketing. Because if you rewind back to, I forget the date when we recorded with Mark Daly, for example, which was basically this interrogation of like, okay, you've paid that astronomical amount of $200 a month. Is it worth it? And now we're sitting here going, that's nothing. In like a span of a couple of weeks, you're like, $200, that's a bargain. I'd pay 10 times that, you know?
Yeah. Of course, the thing that I'm not sure is clear at the moment is who gets access to that. So if you have your $20K per month AI, is that an enterprise thing where you can have 10, 100 people accessing it, or is it just one person?
Well, no surprise. There's like no information.
Right.
And it's all, and then again, you're like, okay, or is this just complete just BS hype that, because I had that same question too. I'm like, well, at some point, because I've actually had this thought previous, which is at what point, like how much would it cost just to get like your own seat at the system?
Yes,
you know what I mean? To just get whatever would be the equivalent of their own access to the system. Like, what does that cost? I mean, clearly you're starting to see them sort of peel out these other tiers of access that they're offering. But it's very interesting.
It is. Plus the fact when you look at this, there are been a lot of conversations around just how much it costs to give access to a cutting edge generative AI system. And all of these sort of rumors that OpenAI is actually losing money at the moment, even though they've got a massive a number of subscribers, it's costing them more than they're getting from this. And maybe this $20,000 just gives you a sense of what the true cost is at the processing power that we're engaging.
Maybe. And the other piece that I'm kind of interested in as well is like, so there's that piece, but then also, I mean, they just can't stop. Like you hear these news. So back in early, well, I guess it would have been like around, it was early, that was the first week. Sorry, there's so many things swirling. The first week of the new White House when they announced like the Stargate project.
Yes.
Right. Yep. And so they're like, yep, we're on the hook for, what was it? Their share was like $100-some billion.
Something like that. Yes.
And now they've announced another, like, oh yeah, we're really into another $100 billion for some other data center.
Yeah.
And then also just a few days ago, or was it even yesterday? It could have even been the announce of this program called Next Gen AI, which is this $50 million fund to work with educational institutions.
Right. Yes.
And I'm sitting here going, where is all this? Like, are they just making this up? Like, where did all these billions of dollars come from?
This is what Silicon Valley does.
Man.
Don't you know the model? I mean, it's the fake it till you make it model.
Gee, again, Modem Future is available for sponsorship.
Yes.
I mean, at
$20,000 a month.
$20,000. How about I'm like, let's play their game.
You get 2 PhDs for that.
That's a bargain. I don't think a better bargain has never been offered.
Yes.
I mean, $50 million. I mean, you just peel off one or two of those and throw them this way. We're happy to join.
Yeah. But it is crazy how things are going, and it's this audacious bet that somehow AI is going to deliver. And I think, I'm not sure whether it's a reasonable bet or not, but clearly we're seeing some sort of delivery at the moment. And I've long argued the distance between sort of what AI is capable of and how we're using it at the moment means that there's a lot to go with. We're going to see sort of massive improvements even with current technologies. But at some point, we're going to run out of steam. Yeah. So this is a massive bet saying if we carry on scaling, we're going to carry on increasing the utility, the intelligence, the ability of these systems. And I'm not sure that everybody agrees with this.
Yeah. And I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think I do. And I mean, that's, by the time this episode airs, the episode where we go into Neil Postman's bit will have aired. So everyone will be familiar. If you haven't listened to it, go back an episode and check that out. But again, that's that hype bursting capability. Because I've been on the record. I'll say it again. I would classify myself as a bloomer, wanting these things to do well, but not at all costs.
Right.
Taking a measured, thoughtful approach. But my biggest concern with these hype machines is that the hype will cause such a backlash when it inevitably can't pay the check that it's writing, that there will be such a market drop that everyone will,
I think it's the trough of disillusionment in the Gartner hype cycle.
Yep,
yes.
for sure. Yep. And which is also a great band name. I've always thought like if I ever were to start, I have absolutely no musical talent, but if I did, I'm like trough of disillusionment would be a great band name.
Right. Yes.
But that's, I think the big concern is like right now, like we just don't know what the longer term benefit, what the net benefit will be.
Yep.
Like at present, you can take a slice of time and you can look and you can find clear boons, things that are amazing. You can find clear harms and damages.
Yep.
Just like with every technology, over time, what is the net benefit to society, et cetera? Right now, when it comes to AI, we just simply have no idea.
Right. Yes.
And one of the things that that makes me uncomfortable, I should say, is when you start having, again, this like, it's going to be the next best thing and all these things. And even recently, I should pull it up to pull the exact quotes or whatever, but there was Satya Nadella from Microsoft had even said like, there's been really no measurable impact on GDP, right? Yep. Which is this measure of like, okay, well, if the promise coming, again, the hype promise that's saying, AI tools will make you 10x, whatever better, whatever that means, 10x more profitable, 10x more efficient. Well, then there's an expectation that should be discernible through actual quantitative output of financial.
That's right. Apart from the fact, if you look at almost any sort of technology innovation, you're usually looking at least 15 years before it matures to the point where you get that return on investment.
Yeah. And I'm worried. My personal worry here is that 15 years is way too long. Given the momentum of the hype.
Yeah,
right? Like,
you're right.
And this is also a problem. I mean, again, this is Sean's hot take on what's wrong with the world. But I think that's a danger when also these companies are dramatically angling these announcements and these tools with sort of like the stock market in mind, the investor in mind, as, invest in us. We'll get bigger and bigger with more and more cash so we can do these things. But at some point, like you mentioned, will investors wait 15 years will
they go on something else? Yes. And where does that leave
And when
us?
does that rug pull happen of like, we've dumped gazillions of dollars.
GPUs as doorstops, I think, is the answer.
When you're like, what is that? Oh, this used to,
this used to be a GPU.
I forget the model, but for the longest time, this is years ago, I used to have, so for these big servers back in the day, these old Xeon servers, the thermal cooler that would sit on these things. They are so cool. Just as a design, they look space age. They look like sort of Blade Runner 2049 kind of had this like appeal. And these things used to be stupid expensive. And it became just a paperweight. Like literally it was a paperweight on my desk for years. And that'll be the new, whatever the latest NVIDIA something fancy pants, GPU will be. But yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm, again, I worry about that element. I worry about this element of that will have a moment where we will lose the potential transformative elements of these technologies as a result of the sort of marketing sort of economic backlash.
It's really hard to tell how this is going to play out. So traditionally with emerging tech, I say traditionally, for the last 50 years or so, 50, 70 years, we've had this process where a lot of the initial innovation has been in universities. So it's been in research groups, funded partially by government, partially by industry, but you've had that academic impetus. And then you've had the translation of those ideas into products which then make money. With AI, things are being flipped. Most of the innovation is coming from companies, full profits. And I think you're right. That makes it far more vulnerable than if you have that base, which is going to be more resilient.
That's steady. Like regardless of what the market does, the work will continue. For its intellectual pursuit. Although maybe it's an opportunity to bring some of it back.
Maybe,
I don't know.
It's going to be very interesting to see. But no matter where it goes, the reality is that the tools that we have at the moment, even if they're making a loss, are crazy powerful. Yeah,
for sure. And I think I was listening to, it used to be, I won't even give the long term. There's a podcast called Intelligent Machines that used to be by a different name. But it was real interesting, and they have sort of pivoted. This is with like Leo Laporte in that group, and they had Gary Marcus was on talking, as explaining his sort of criticisms, which I think echo a lot of mine in terms of busting that hype, just being accountable, right? But also, I would say, the need is you can hold people's feet to the fire, but also you have to be like open to when things actually are really cool.
To change, yes.
And so I think, that's a good piece, but I think one of the myths that has sort of come along with all this hype is this push towards the AGI, artificial general intelligence, which, and then you can get from there, you springboard into.
And of course, but this is the marketing drive that we have to push as hard as possible until we get artificial general intelligence, in which case everything will take off and nothing will be the same again. The trouble is, if you don't get to that point, you've promised the moon.
Then that is exactly it. And that's like, if I have like one big cautionary plea to it's like, it's essentially that I feel like the hype has promised something that can't, or maybe never will be achievable in the way that it's been promised. And so it's set up for this impossible, what is AGI? There's no actual definition. It moves, and people have started to change it from something more philosophical to just money based. Like, we've reached AGI when we hit $100 million or whatever.
I know you redefine it.
Redefine it. And so it sets up this impossibility. And I think the danger there is taking away from what I think, from my perspective, would be something that would be incredibly transformative, is having all kinds of different things that do their thing incredibly well better, and it's like a symphony of those things together, which creates this.
But actually,
change.
this might happen. So I was thinking through this and thinking through scenarios. I actually think a plausible scenario is that the big tech leaders at the moment, the OpenAIs, the Anthropics of this world, may actually end up becoming dinosaurs. But what comes next is the smaller, more fleet-footed companies that are actually building on the success of the giants and producing much smaller, much more agile models, much more powerful models at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah, and that's really exciting. I think I like that because I don't think I can even say I've been falling victim to just like watching these whales of AI companies. And
but we saw this with DeepSeek, of course. So if you have 100 DeepSeeks coming along.
Yeah, and that's always the, these big ones will go and fall away, but then it's what comes up afterwards could really revolutionize it. And then, of course, then you get into this issue too of if though these companies start engaging in ladder pulling with, and that's always a problem, right? With especially in the tech industry. But that would be really exciting to see. But as I say that,
it's the evolution of tech. So OpenAI grows, it dies, it rots, it fertilizes the ground, and the next generation flourishes.
Ashes to ashes, right? I think that's really, I like that because that you've just instilled a little bit of hope. More. You just, I'm like, I feel better about things now. So thank you.
Good.
And speaking of feeling better about some things, also, I think one thing that'd be kind of fun to talk a little bit about too is kind of bringing this conversation back a little bit to education.
Yes.
And granted, that is a massive bite to try to take, right? But like just recently, last week, I was at a local conference here at ASU that was focused on the future of learning community, otherwise known as the Folk Fest. And it was just, it's a great collection of faculty and staff sharing and exploring new technologies, new tools, new pedagogies. And what was, I think for me being there, one of the things that was refreshing was seeing the multitude of ways that people are taking this.
Right.
But it also brought back to me just this challenge that still exists with a lot of traditional mindsets in the space of education, thinking very, very, very limited about the potential of what does this mean for education, and even broader than education, what does it mean for learning?
Right.
Which is not, education is, maybe we think about it in normal terms, we sort of assign that to a very a very prescriptive thing.
It's a very formal approach.
Learning
is what we do all the time.
What we do, right? And someone had brought up, this really good point when they were asked, because they were changing a bunch of things and they're sharing these. And a lot of the conversation was focusing around this idea of if you just think about education in a reductionist way, that it is that, a proper education or whatever is this collection of outputs. Right? That this is a very reductionist way of thinking of it, which of course is ripe for, the AI can steal all that and do all that because that's what it is good at, is creating those outputs, but really focusing on the process, not the product. And really moving towards that and thinking about how artificial intelligence in many forms, not just LLMs or AGI, but also just broadly is thinking about ways in which this new sort of emergent push of these technologies can really transform what we do, as opposed to just replacing what we do.
That's right. And that's where I think we have to think about fundamentally, not only what does it mean to be human, but what does it mean to be a human and learn and develop skills that allow you to live and thrive and problem solve. And then once you've got that, what is the role of AI within that? So then that sort of separates out that from just formal education and gets to the idea of maturing and progressing and learning and growing and asking sort of how AI begins to sort of nurture that and accelerate it. But even when we're talking about acceleration, we've got to work out what we're accelerating to. And I think that's part of the danger here, that if we just think that more is better without defining what the more is, we've probably got a problem.
And like we have, exactly. Right. What do you do?
We just want more in education.
We just want more.
Yes,
it's like, okay, sure, boom. Just pay me $10,000 a month, and you
20,000.
$20,000. Yeah, I got to stop lowering it. 30,000. Let's go higher. But and I think And I was, because I think about this a lot when anytime I'm having these conversations or if I'm reading things because again, if you've been working in the space of educational technology or emerging technology in education, the conversation is, it's parallel. These things are always sort of, or cyclical. We have them all the time.
Yep.
And so if you have been working in like emerging technologies, this idea of coming back to, let's say your own domain of knowledge, when you come back to this, there's always this life cycle of, well, how does this, when we think about technology and education, there's the concept of, are you teaching through the technology, about the technology, with the technology? And in reality, it's usually some mixture of all those things at play.
I explained a little bit what the difference between with and through is.
Yeah. So like something where you teach through a technology is where it's basically a replacement.
Okay.
Right. So the easiest example is like writing. Writing with pen and paper versus writing on a word processor.
Okay, yes.
Right? That you're ignoring potentially what the affordances and or constraints are of this technology.
Yes,
and you're just replacing
you're just
something.
bringing it in.
Yeah. When it's with, that usually is bringing, again, those affordances and constraints, but acknowledging them and working towards the affordances and trying to mitigate the.
But it sounds like the with is you've got your eye on the prize in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and the technology is brought in as a way of achieving that.
That's right. And there's very specific models. Like there's a SAMR model that, and there's the TPACK model that explore different ways.
I love the way you just throw out these acronyms.
Yeah. We'll come back then, but we'll have to have somebody. We'll have Punya come and we'll talk TPACK.
This is a colleague of ours.
Punya Mishra, who TPACK has been, maybe he won't want to talk about TPACK anymore. I don't know.
But he is the world expert. He basically created the system.
Yeah.
We're still talking about TPACK without anybody having the focus what we're talking about. So.
Yeah, it's technology, technological knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and content knowledge.
Right.
So as an educator, as a domain, you have these domains, and it's a framework. So it's the most effective teaching and learning happens at the intersection of all those things together.
Yes.
So traditionally when we think about like an educator, they normally an in-service educator would have the content knowledge. They are a social studies teacher or whatever. They have the content knowledge. They have the pedagogical knowledge. They know how to teach their subject.
Yep.
And then you add in the technological knowledge, which maybe they do have, maybe they don't. And it's when you put those all together, you get this amazing thing with how do you then use technology in learning.
Rather than emphasizing the technology and de-emphasizing the others.
Correct.
Which I feel we see so often where you've got usually somebody who isn't an educator decides that this piece of technology is the best thing since sliced bread and forces it on teachers and they say, use this.
Yep.
And the teacher then, or the educator, effectively has to pull back from what they know they can do to incorporating this technology. And half the time, you're actually decreasing their ability because they're grappling with the technology rather than doing what they're good at.
Yeah, and even if you're not in education, I mean, you could the parallel here is anytime anyone's told you, here, use this, you now have to do this, and you're like, what? I didn't ask for this.
I have horror stories.
You now will be using this system, and you're like, what?
I would actually say as a university professor, over the years, I've tried this. I've been a good citizen when somebody said, this is the tool you have to use. I've tried using it. But in the last few years, I've been cutting out these tools from my teaching. And there's been a direct correlation between the quality of my teaching and the quality of the learning in class and me ditching these technologies.
Yeah. Well, and that's like, philosophically, the hope is with any of these technologies that they provide a new pathway to reaching that. Like, again, I've used this sort of before where I'm like, it's like an asymptote, right? You can get closer and closer to this ideal space. You never actually get there, but you always are moving towards it.
Right.
And because everything keeps changing, like the tech, even if the content knowledge and the pedagogical approaches never change, which isn't true. The technology certainly will.
Right.
And so it's not a static thing. It is a ongoing process of, and then you can layer in, you can start getting fancy and you can layer in design element, whatever.
Right. But a key part of this, and I'm not sure whether this is where we want to take the conversation. But I think it's really interesting looking at that intersection between learning and technology. There has got to be agency with the teacher, the instructor.
Yep.
So again, coming back to that framework, that the person that has content expertise, pedagogical expertise, they have got to have the agency to decide which technologies they bring in and how to use it to maximize their impact, rather than somebody else dictate to them what they do.
And that's crucial, because also if you think about, and like for people, again, if you're not an educator yourself, if you think about the giant spectrum of education, so everything from primary, like, kindergarten, all the way through university, graduate degrees, whatever, the educator who is there, right? They also know their students the most. So also age becomes a big factor, right? Like, what is appropriate for a 15-year-old in high school is not going to be the same technology and access appropriate for a third grader, or like a little kid, like a 3 or 4-year-old, right? But oftentimes, like when those decisions are made by, I'll just say Suits or something, made by corporate lawyers, someone says, you will now, congratulations, you are now use this platform that we paid money for.
Right.
Oftentimes that's without that knowledge, right? Or without that understanding. And so also it takes that expertise to understand, who are my students? What is my community of students? Because that's not the same. That's not the same from class to class, from school to school, from state to state, from country to country. I mean, it's all different. Without that knowledge, you're lacking how best to educate people. And so then you layer this together. It's like, that role, that I'm a strong believer that decision should take place at the educator level because then you have the challenge, of course, of support. And
of course, so it's got to be a partnership and a team. But yes, the educator is absolutely crucial in this. And it's funny listening to this. So this is an interesting connection, an unexpected one. So I'm working at the moment on a piece which will have been published by the time this airs, on the idea and the notion of care in technology innovation. And it's a really interesting concept that people are working with, which asks, how can we bring in this concept of care, or an ethic of care, to how we develop and use technologies? So you look at it in the classroom. So you look at a teacher and their relationship with their students. It's a relationship of care. A good teacher or a good educator will know that they've got a duty of care to their students, and that care sort of extends to what they learn and how they learn, and how they do that within an environment which is conducive to learning. So they get this. But at the moment, there is a lack of care with technology innovation quite often, where the people deciding what technology is going to be used in the classroom aren't thinking about care. They don't have a duty of care. They just think, this is cool, let's give it to people.
Or they have that reductionist viewpoint.
That's right, yes.
All that matters is whether they pump out these artifacts.
That's right. Now imagine that the people making decisions along the technologies actually had to think about sort of care in terms of, how is this going to impact the teacher and the students? How is it going to enhance what they're trying to do? How is it going to cause harm to what they're going to do? And how do you navigate that? And I don't think people are thinking like this, because it's a very new concept, but I think it's an incredibly powerful one. And talking with colleagues, and it's easy to think care is sort of soft and fuzzy and not really important. Actually, it's really hard and it's operational, and it's something that you can embed into something that allows you to make smarter decisions on how you use technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even just in terms of like in the educational environment, like a classroom or whatever, of also just how, I mean, so much can be dictated there in terms of the success by how much, safety people feel in an environment, the relationships from, student to faculty, from student to student. Like, I mean, all those, it's a community, it's an organism in some ways.
That's right. Yes.
We talked before. I mean, it's ecological. It's all the parts together.
And again, so you think about sort of, again, I'm going to get all of those people who are true ecologists sort of
we just apologize.
Hot under the collar there. But
we just blanket apologize.
But you think about sort of this community, this ecology around learning. If everybody approached this from the perspective of care, thinking, how does what I do enhance others and their ability to do their job, versus how does what I do harm others and their ability to do their job? I think it would be transformational, especially in complex organizations where you've got different people with different roles.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, people who have been in the ed tech community for a while, they're familiar with this idea.
Right.
But a lot of that's not most people, right? That's usually not
Right.
that's not most people. And it's a very challenging piece because I think, and I forget who I was talking to recently, that had mentioned it. So if I can think of it, I'll try to put it in the show notes. But basically, it was like when you think that you know the answer, like we're going to do this and we're going to go this way, and this is going to improve outcomes, but is asking that question. Well, what if I'm wrong?
Right. Yes.
Right. Like,
yes.
what if
having that humility?
Yeah.
Yes.
What if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
And this goes horribly. Like, how am I going to know that?
And then the second question is, well, exactly. You just said it. How do you know? If you're wrong, how do you know?
How do you know?
And one of the answers is talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And find out. Because, kind of coming back again, this this fight against this reductionist sort of viewpoint on like education and learning is also, is being I've always been a proponent of this idea of creating performances of understanding.
Okay.
Right. So for math, you might think instead of like a traditional, you sit down, you've got that paper exam and you just go through the problems on the exam and you're like there. And that demonstrates, and again, under a traditional method, you could say, that demonstrates your understanding. You knew the concepts, you were able to either correctly or incorrectly, you demonstrated what you knew how to execute on that exam. Versus a performance of understanding of saying like, okay, let's take something, like the concept of like geometry or something, or you're like, how do you calculate the area of a square or a three-dimensional object like a cone, right? Yep, you can go through the proofs, you can do all that kind of stuff on a piece of paper. But that also, you're right off the bat, you're sort of disadvantaging people who don't perform well under those kind of things.
Right, yes.
Or if you make a mistake, you have a bad day. We all know this. Everyone's had this experience. You have a bad day and you bomb that test that you're like, I know the material.
Right.
But a performance of understanding rather says, okay, leverage, especially in the ed tech sort of space, it's like leverage the tools at your disposal to demonstrate this concept.
Right.
So that could be that could be like taking a video and explaining to get the the volume of this thing, you do this and you do this, because then you can do it you don't have to have the and so using these things together, you allow for people to demonstrate that they understand the depth, even if they get it wrong on a
Yes. And what seems so critical there is the difference between what somebody understands and what they're capable of doing and how you evaluate it. And of course, the ultimate aim is not the evaluation. The ultimate aim is those skills and that learning and that understanding of the individual.
Yep. Yeah. And, and I mean, not to, we'll hear about it, I guess, but not to, you get far in there too, you start, you can start picking at some of the origins of, again, a formal education and like, why do we have grades and marks and things like that? And that's a big question too, right? Like, and that was something, again, just even last week, a lot of people at the university level starting to chatter about it's like, well, what's the point anymore? And for me, what I like to hear is even just questioning that. What's the point of assigning like points to an assignment or a grade?
And it's such an important conversation. And again, I suspect many people listening will be thinking, that's heretical. Of course, you've got to be able to evaluate things.
How do you get an A if you don't have any points?
I know, but it's this obsession with things or letters on bits of paper, which is actually nothing to do necessarily with what you can actually do and what you know, unless you've got those evaluations correct. But one of the things that startled me in recent years here in a university, and I have to say that the approach to grading and learning is different in the US to where I grew up in the UK. Very, very different. But this was in the US, and it was in an engineering department, which traditionally is very, very focused on the stuff that you learn, the facts that you learn, and your ability to use that, which you need, because if you're building something like a plane, you don't want to be woolly about sort of what you do, sort of approximately this or that.
The ball goes somewhere.
But in this meeting, we were talking about grades, and the person leading the meeting said, actually, I think we ought to ditch grades. We ought to ditch anything where somebody does an assignment to get a grade, because the evidence is they are totally disconnected from your true ability to do stuff from what you've learned. And it sounds controversial, but I think more and more people are thinking about how do we focus on what you've learned and what you can do rather than just the assessment, because people adapt to the assessment.
Sure. And then you very quickly you can find why you have these models, which is you teach to the test.
Right. That's it.
So it's not about whether you truly understand these concepts. It's can you pass the exam?
Right. Yes.
And then you're like, you do that, and then but you're no better off.
You don't actually know anything. You can just how to pass a test.
And then worse, you have a piece of paper that says you do. Right. Yes. And then you're like, but I don't know. And so that's so I think when having these conversations, for me, that's like one of the things that I keep sort of bringing up as a provocation or trying to really challenge people is like, okay, even today, right? If you have access. At home, everyone theoretically has access. Of course, that's not really true, but generally speaking, access to AI technologies, even today, like Microsoft Word, it's in there. Google Drive, it's in there. There's very few places you can go and not have it. And so that's still very present. So as we move forward, if you stick to this reductionist approach, there's nothing to do. I mean, you can literally just have the AI just do, right? I mean, you can theoretically have
a test for you.
AI instructor, AI students, and just be like, okay. But it's really coming back to focusing on the process, which that's the space where I start getting excited because then I'm like, now potentially working with these technologies, having an ability to bring sort of like this older, more philosophical perspective of education or learning back to maybe some of its, historical roots of having, a guide or an expert in the room and being able to talk with people in a way that makes sense and not, again, you go into any university classroom where there's 100 students or more, that's distance learning.
Right.
I mean, you might
it's
be
a 50-foot distance, but it's still a distance.
It's distance learning. I mean, it's just, you can't have that kind of exchange.
So I would say, I actually manage classes up to 100 plus students where I do sort of narrow the distance. But you're right. If it's
that's also that's the exception, I think, to a lot of the rules.
But if it's the sage on the stage or if it's at the front.
And there are times for that.
I think it's a very, very powerful way of teaching.
It is.
But it has to be right for the right circumstance.
That's right. And it has its role. Like, do all classes need to be that way? Of course not.
Right.
Do all classes never need to have that? Of course not. Like, again, it can be a beautiful learning experience.
Yes.
But it brings me back to, and this wouldn't be a Sean thing if I didn't go back to the 19th century.
Which book or which philosopher is this?
We're going, so, and I have some professional success with this mechanism, both in terms of writing about it, but also doing some really, in my opinion, fascinating course redesigns of evoking good old John Dewey.
Okay.
All right?
So of the Dewey Decimal System. Yes.
but going back to John Dewey, with sort of this idea. It came from 1899, the school and the society. So basically, John Dewey is credited with sort of like with establishing the 4 natural impulses for learners. And so it's inquiry, right? The urge to find outcomes, explore things, ask questions. And so the premise of this, I should back up. The premise of this, when his perspective was, and he's a quite famous American philosopher and psychologist and reformer, from basically the mid 1800s. He's quite old. He almost made it to 100 years old. He died in 1952. But there was this idea of all people have a natural inclination to learn, and what education should be doing is using those natural, the intrinsic elements of learning to nurture young minds, to satiate that, to create educated population. He was really big on creating a very civically minded group of people. So as we make decisions about how we govern ourselves, it's much better if those people are educated. And so he kind of outlaid these 4 natural impulses. I'll go through them real quickly. So it's inquiry. So the investigation, which I just said. So basically, we all have this natural urge to question the world around us.
Yes. Yep.
Babies do this all the time. And if you're a parent with young children, I'm sorry your babies are putting everything in their mouth.
Wow.
That's their inquiry. They're exploring the world around them.
Yep.
Communication.
Yep.
So the social impulse to converse, share, be in dialogue with others. Some at times, I've been accused of doing this too much.
Never.
No surprise, right? Construction, the desire to make things or build things.
Yep.
Using your hands, the practical instinct to do stuff. And then the last one is expression, the drive to creatively express yourself through your feelings, through your thoughts. Often this is where you get into like art or play and things like that. So where I get really excited with things like thinking about how will artificial intelligence have a transformative impact in education and learning. This is where I get really excited, is finding educators, maybe new companies that don't even exist yet, that will take these sort of ideas around these 4 natural impulses and think about not the product, but how can these tools foster these natural impulses
sort of leverage and catalyze, or actually, I'm not even quite sure what the right word is, sort of create a conduit where they just flow.
Yeah.
And I have this metaphor in my mind, just as you've described this, which I think is wonderful. It's almost as if you've got a really tall dam with a full lake behind. And the full lake represents the learner. And too often with tech innovation, we're standing on the top of the dam and we're calling to the water saying, come up here.
Yeah.
And we're creating these incredible technologies that are going to entice the water to come up. Whereas actually the solution is to bore a hole at the bottom of the dam and just let it do its thing and flow.
Let it go.
And so maybe this is how we need to think about AI. How do you develop AI systems that just allow people to do their thing when it comes to learning?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I mean, like some colleagues of mine here at ASU, we redesigned a first 100 level course on emerging technology using the course was structured around these, like, how do you use emerging technologies to do these things? But that, because again, the idea here, again, going back to 1899, right? That the idea here is that and to use he uses the word the child, right? So the child in an educational environment has these natural impulses. What doesn't work, even arguing back then, is that they're not an empty vessel to be filled with your knowledge. Again, there are times where your knowledge that's 100% needed. But that's part of the inquiry. They have this inquiry of what is this work? I have the knowledge to give it. Then they can talk about that. They can communicate it. Then they can try building their own thing and build it with their own sort of identity. And that's where that performance comes in. Is really around sort of like the construction and the expression elements. But this is where I get really, really excited. And we'll have to come back to this because I think, I could pop off here for another hour just on this. But again, this is where I get really excited about these potentials where you're starting to see them, whether it be again, we talked about this before when you were sharing the work that you had done creating that the dissertation.
Right? With AI,
And so what you're having is this ability to go, if we sort of, I'm mentally evoking sort of like the 10,000 hour rule, right? So what used to take, you could say, to reach an expert level of output, a 10,000, which is not accurate, but we can use it. That can be now 3 hours.
That's it. You concatenate the whole thing.
It just has completely. But now as a learner, your inquiry, you're exploring the world, and your construction now can go from what would have taken ages, 10 years or so, to get you to the place where your output could match what you were wanting to do. Now has collapsed that down to almost nothing.
And you have agency in this process.
And you have agency in it. In inquiry and communication.
So
it's really exciting. I'm starting to bubble.
I'm going to raise a question here. But I love this model, and it jives so much with how I approach learning. But there is a challenge, and the challenge is, how do learners create the scaffolding that is necessary to learn in ways that are both efficient and beneficial? So you go back right to the sort of beginning of sort of kindergarten, first grade, those basic ideas of how to communicate, how to write, how to read, how to do basic math. educators would argue that that's part of the scaffolding that allows learners to thrive.
Yep.
And are there aspects of this where if we're not careful, you'll have learners that are being exposed to stuff without understanding how to actually sort of find their way through?
Yes. And that's, so what I maybe have like grotesquely neglected here is this is not an absence of the educator.
Right. Okay.
Right?
Yes.
It's under their tutelage.
So now the educator is like a mentor or a tutor that actually helped you.
That's right.
Guide you through this process.
Because again, remember these educators, whichever like domain you pop into, they understand the content and the pedagogy of how
back to that framework,
of how best to I don't know why I'm stuck on this word today, to satiate that inquiry. So they understand like, but providing those opportunities. So it's really about working in this educational environment that nurtures these things given the domain that you're in, right? So if you're in a social studies class, your inquiry, communication, and construction and expression are going to look different than those same 4 things in math or in language arts or something. But it's about nurturing those 4 elements in whatever it is that you do.
But then you've got an environment where, again, if you're looking at AI, the AI isn't just a tool for the teacher or the student. The AI is something that changes the whole environment with everybody in it. So it's almost like sort of the instructor, the students, whoever, co-creating together with the aid of AI. And that is very, very different from the idea of just putting AI in the hands of students or in the hands of teachers.
And I think that's a beautiful place to get to because, even going back to, coding is a good example. And there's, for the last 10 plus years, there's been a very strong push to getting, CS for all, like code, computer science or coding, computer literacy, this kind of stuff for everyone, right? Well, oftentimes the educators, they don't know.
Right.
We developed a program here at ASU that was specifically geared towards getting teachers their computer science endorsement. One of the big pieces of that is understanding that they do not need to be the expert.
Right.
It's, you move from like the sage on the stage, to the, I butchered another one. I did it again. To the guide on the side. That's it.
I was wondering where this was going. Yes.
I hope no one's
going to go to the elf on the shelf next.
I hope no one's actually tallying the number of quotes or things that I butcher. But really that was a big piece of that, of getting over the fear of I don't want to bring this in because I don't know enough about being the expert. And with AI tools that are changing like yearly, monthly, it seems weekly at times, I think that same approach holds where it's not about having mastery control over this technology, but it is, in some ways, it's part of the environment that you're both navigating together.
Absolutely, yes.
And with that, of course, comes this invisible element of, there needs to be, again, people working on this, like what we're bringing these tools in, what are the consequences, what are the harms?
Of course,
so that they can be mitigated or used appropriately.
That comes back to this idea of care, and especially in a community. How, as a community, do we ensure that AI is used in a way that really sort of promotes care on every single front?
No, I think 100%. I mean, I think that is part of it. And what I like about that, and I think this is a good place for us to kind of wind down, because otherwise, like I said, I'm ready to pop off for another hour. Is that, again, that brings back the humanity.
That's
that brings
exactly
back
it, yes.
And
human, why we're doing this.
The human element. Because, to be honest, if there's not a humanistic approach to this, it's like, what's the point?
Right.
It's just in many ways, right? Like that is the thing. And the part that gets me excited about the future of this is that through these technologies, I'm hoping it will collapse the distance that has somewhat been, like, you could argue the technology has created distance away from the student to the educator, from the content, that in some ways it feels like there's been distance created. I'm hoping that this technology, while the technology itself can do the outputs, fine, collapse that distance to engage with each other and engage with the knowledge and engage and explore and see what can we do now that we were not able to do by ourselves before.
I love that.
I think that's what gets me excited. I got goosebumps. So
good place to end.
Good place to end. Well, yeah. I wasn't sure how long I was like, I only wrote a couple of things down and we had no trouble filling that time.
Right.
So, but awesome. Well, anyway, again, I will put as much information as I can into the show notes. Yeah. And again, just a reminder too, get in touch with us, reach out through, podcast stuff, find us on YouTube, find us on LinkedIn, wherever.
And especially if you don't use a case on your phone,
let me know.
Make him feel good.
I'm not alone, am I? I really hope not. Anyway, well, thanks again, Andrew. Thanks again, always, for just an amazing conversation.
Same here, Sean. Yep.
And we'll see you on the next episode of Modem Futura.
See you there.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End transmission.